So, the Prime Minister, in all his generosity, has decided to reform the prison system. The BBC says that in order to reform the system, the Prime Minister needs to really minimise the incarcerated, low-paid workforce in the prison system. So, in order to reform the system, he needs to take out as many prisoners as possible so that the more perhaps insane, because somebody that commits a crime of violence has to be insane at that particular moment in time. So those prisoners can hopefully be conditioned to be good members of society. But let's face it, the system that we're living in is, it's a bit like living in crud. I don't know whether there's a town, city or village called Crud, but it might be a nice place to live. Anyway, the prison system is not fit for purpose. And I love saying things like that because, it's from an MP, I can't even remember who said it there. And it needs to be reformed. That's my niece. The prison system needs to be reformed. And the only way that it can be done really is to minimise the prison population. So, seeing as the Prime Minister, Mr. David Cameron, has denied the freedom of Julian Assange, I doubt very much whether he will even acknowledge this document from the United Nations I'm about to show you. And with that, I'll dig it up. Here it is. I don't know whether you can see it, but let's just have a check. You can see the United Nations there. So what I'll do is just lower this a little bit, and we find out there is the General Assembly of the United Nations. And we go over here a bit, we see the number of it, A, backward slash 665, backward slash 255, distribution journal, 6th of August 2010, original language, English. And we come to this document here, which is from the General Assembly of the United Nations. And it's the 65th session, item 69B of the provisional agenda. And it says, right of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. Well, to cut a very long story short, if we go to the recommendations, remembering that this is 2010, at the end of 2010 I must admit, so it's only been 5 years. The recommendations are and the biggest one, of course, is this one. This one. Where is it? There it is. Decriminalise or depenalise possession and use of drugs. So, not only has Mr. David Cameron chosen to disregard the lawful demands of the highest authority on the planet for the past 5 years, he has also denied the recommendation of the United Nations to decriminalise or depenalise possession and use of drugs. So for 5 years, every single prisoner that's been within the prison system that's been incarcerated has been incarcerated against the advice and recommendations of the highest authority on the planet. And David Cameron puts himself above that authority, both in the case of Julian Assange and also the criminalisation of drug users. Now, I think it was May 2010, but I might be wrong, there was a discussion paper sent by the United Nations before this document came into existence in 2010. And Baroness Meacher at the time said in the House of Lords, there is no more obvious waste of money than the £19 billion spent on drug prohibition and penalisation and criminalisation. And this has, although I mentioned it to Ian Duncan Smith at a meeting, one of those fringe meetings a few years back, he just word for word repeated what the government says now. So in effect, they're wasting £19 billion a year on drug prohibition when the United Nations advises them not to penalise and criminalise drug users. They should be treated as medical cases and not criminalised for it. And this is what the United Nations says in this document. They say, and I add a little bit at the end, they say drug prohibition harms the user, the user's family, the user's community, and by harming the community harms the nation, and by the nation being harmed, the world is harmed. And that's what David Cameron's doing as far as drug prohibition is concerned. He goes against the advice of the United Nations, and he should not go against the advice of the United Nations, because what he's actually doing is violating human rights. As the document says at the very beginning, it says, there we go, right of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. That's what this document from the General Assembly of the United Nations says. And then one of the recommendations that the government should follow is the decriminalisation and depenalisation of drugs, drug users, and those with drugs in their possession. It has to stop because you're violating human rights. It's a right to enjoy this high standard of physical and mental health. And because you damage people by imprisoning them, you're not aiding towards attaining that standard, that highest standard of physical and mental health. David Cameron is a human rights violator. I'm trying to turn it up. Here we go. Bye, everybody.